Hi, welcome to PhDizzle. I'm your host, Alice Cheng, and today we are interviewing Amielle Moreno, who got her BS dual degree in biology and psychology from the University of Washington, and her PhD in neuroscience from Emory University, and she's currently a science communicator. Let's start with your scientific journey. So you ended up in neuroscience, but you started out, I guess, psychology. I kind of see the connection there, but psychology and biology. So maybe tell me a little bit about what inspired you to get your PhD, and then we can talk a little bit about the PhD research you did.
Yeah, sure. I took my sweet ass time. I like to slowly inch into something to make sure that the water's comfortable. I got into biology in high school, and I knew I wanted to do something around that. But then I took a course that wasn't even called neuroscience yet. It was called biopsychology. And it really was a neuroscience course where I just fell in love with how psychology and biology overlap in this neuroscience area, how we can explain these diverse behaviors that people have down to the connections that are occurring in this lump of tissue in our skull. That was so fascinating to me.
And so how did you transition then and decide to do a PhD? Like, were you doing research at that time?
I had a longer journey than that. When I was graduating from undergrad, I thought that it would be nice to work in a field of biology where I'd be dealing with physiology level, but also be my own boss. So I went into chiropractic medicine. I applied to schools and got in, but I deferred for a year so that I could work with a chiropractor. What I found was that this person that I was working for was just selling snake oil. He wasn't helping anyone. This wasn't an environment that appreciated science. And I was basically fired for asking too many questions. Yeah, and I just come out of, these high level biology courses where you are primed to ask questions and know more in a way to understand. And then this environment where you have to believe or the magic doesn't work, I found didn't click for me. I understand not all #NotALLchiropractors, but this one just soured me to it. So I knew I needed to find an environment where it was okay to be myself, and that's an inquisitive person. So I started working in a lab that dealt with chemistry. I didn't like that everything was dead. And so I knew I wanted to move to a biology lab, and I knew I loved neuroscience. So I started working in a neuroscience lab at the University of Washington, go Huskies. There I studied the retina and got to play with squirrel monkeys and mice. I did behavior training, and I did cellular work, which was both of my interests in psych and biology, looking at these larger behaviors and then the small molecules and proteins that could possibly be the root cause of those behaviors. The reason I applied for grad school is I really always had this voice in my head that said, it's not good enough, do more. And so I knew if I had stopped at undergrad, I just wouldn't feel like I accomplished enough. And if I went to a master's program, I would always be telling myself, but you could have gotten a PhD. So I just, had that drive in me to go to the highest level that I could. And it was the biggest challenge of my life. It is so draining and demoralizing and challenging. Also, you get to dream big because you are eventually, deep in the PhD, testing your own ideas and getting, results that say that you're wrong a lot. I got to study hormones, which are so fascinating because they are these little molecules able to change your behavior and potentially have bigger effects on learning and memory. And I got to work with female mice, which is sometimes rare in research that we get to look at a female model organism instead of males. So that was really important to me, that I broaden our understanding of female biology and brain and then hormones. I got to work with brilliant people. I was the dumbest person in the room, and I like it like that.
I'm really glad you were honest about your experience, about the ups and the downs. I'm really happy you made it through, and I think there's a lot of things that happen in grad school that aren't talked about. People are more open to discussing it now, but things that
mostly what isn't talked about is the crying. There's a lot of crying in grad school. I drew this little cartoon that was somebody giving a lab tour and saying, oh, this is the dark room. We use this to, develop pictures of our gels. But mostly people go in there to cry. And then the other person says, is that a sign-up sheet? And it really does feel like that. My PI was a physicist. He got to work with another physicist who had transitioned into understanding auditory cues, basically how we hear. And the model that he was looking at was in mice, so that we can study the various areas in the mouse brain where sound is understood. And eventually that leads to one of the final areas of processing sound, which is the auditory cortex. And it's here that it's theorized memories of sounds might be held. There are a couple of instances of learning sounds when you're a child, and we know that the brain is, during development, is very plastic and able to learn and pick up new cues. During adulthood, there aren't as many instances of intense learning and changes of behavior, except when you're dealing with moms. Mother mouse has transitioned from a state of being naive to babies and to their stimuli, their smell, their sound, to a state where they're very familiar with it and incredibly responsive. There's this behavior that they'll immediately do, which is caretaking and grooming and feeding and responding to these sounds. So during the post-pregnancy and early care, moms have to rapidly learn a new sound, the sound of their pups, and know that that's important. And if they don't learn, the chances of their pups, their babies surviving is going to go down. So here's an instance of plasticity, of learning in not only a female brain, but an adult brain, which is extra interesting. And the idea of my thesis was that the hormones that are involved with pregnancy might aid in that plasticity and the learning of these social cues. If I'm going to think about how this could apply to other populations, eventually we might be able to understand the mechanisms that the hormones enact and no longer need actual hormones to enact plasticity. And this would be a far into the future aspect of this research. Or there's something that's very real and present in females when they age. As a woman gets older and she loses estrogen, she's going through menopause, and there's a lot of cognitive decline associated with the loss of those hormones. So if we could provide the aspect of hormones that help in cognitive processing without actually using hormones, that would be really helpful, because the hormones have a lot of other side effects to them that aren't ideal.
A lot of the science I know is trying to understand a problem, how to prevent decline, like you were talking about, as people get older. I think it's so fascinating that the topic that you studied during your PhD of this, it's like an enhancement in their cognitive ability that just happens naturally, right? Like biology is so cool. Normally people are like, okay, biology, we got to fix this. It's like a cancer or something. But in some cases it's really cool, and your body naturally does this for you, and it's an evolutionary thing, right? Because you can't survive, or your kids won't be able to survive if you can't take care of them.
Yeah, in science, there's two different types of studies. There's basic science, and then there's disease form science. Basic science research is addressing a system that we want to know more about that isn't necessarily associated with a diseased state. In this case, my research is a basic science in that the implication as a result of the research being completed is to know more, just to know more about this system.
It's been so nice to have you explain some of these things, which I think segues into the next part, which makes sense because you are in science communication.
No way!
This started not just recently, right? Like it started back in grad school. So tell me about how you got into science communication.
Well, I found myself having the most fun in grad school when I was writing. We luckily had this program newsletter, an online blog that would have stories written by the students about the program or about research. And I found myself having so much fun putting together little creative articles with fun pictures and captions and trying to model it after like Cracked or other popular at the time websites that dealt with providing information. I don't know if every female experiences this, but I like to say that as a female, I can tell when people stop listening to me. And I can see a glaze kind of go over the eyes when a female voice has been talking for too long. And when I notice that, I know I need to punch up things, wrap them up, or engage the person. And that came across in my writing in that I would make sure to interject points of humor or interesting questions or interesting facts at a regular interval to like keep people engaged. I loved crafting them, and I still go back and read some of my stuff and I still laugh at it. Going forward, I'm excited to get some more articles under my belt. I am taking this year to try my hand at freelance science writing and communication.
Awesome.
I'm going to create a website, which is just really difficult for me to think about. But right now I am working on my own podcast with a co-host. Yeah, it's another female comedian who has worked in neuroscience. And she and I decided that we were going to do like a fun journal club. Journal club's usually where you share recent papers that have come out in your field of interest. And she's interested in behavior neuroscience as well. It's called the Misbehavior Journal Club.
Oh.
Yeah, we're very excited about that.
Okay, and is it going to be, so it's scientific, but is it communicated, it's like scientific but communicated to a lay audience? Is that the purpose?
It's kind of a behind the scenes look at research. So we're going to be each episode talking a little bit about science in the news that is, neuroscience related, and then we'll pick an article to share. And as we share it, we're kind of explaining, oh, that paradigm, oh my God, the mice, they just hate this, or oh, when that happens, I saw what they did with that outlier. They decided to keep it because it was going the right direction. It's kind of a scientist's take on these articles. So somebody who doesn't know neuroscience but is interested in what we know about the brain can enjoy it, but also grad students that are kind of in the trenches working on stuff being like, yes, there was something wrong with that antibody, everybody hates it, and so we hope it's enjoyable. It's kind of like a no PIs allowed place.
How did you find your co-host?
Well, we had both done science communication in Atlanta. I went to Emory. There is a big community around the Atlanta Science Festival. And one of the shows that they decided to fund and put on was a science comedy night. And so what they did is they asked for scientists to come in, and they had a couple workshops for us to learn how to present things comically and develop an act and then perform it on stage. I had already had some background in stand-up comedy, so I thought, great, I'm just going to figure out a new way to talk about my research and interject comedy into it. So I got to go on stage. I think I've done it 3 times now to discuss my research and what it's like to be a scientist and make very tasteless jokes at the same time. It's exactly what I'm happy with.
So, okay, I think this is great because it ties into one of your hobbies, which is on the comedy side. But tell me, so I didn't know you had a background in stand-up either. So tell me how did you get interested in comedy originally, and now how do you weave that into your science communication?
I think, it all goes back to that, my dear mother. She believed children should be seen and not heard. And she also loved television and passed that love on to me, and mostly humorous shows. If something wasn't funny or entertaining or witty, it didn't hold her attention. So that kind of got me into a performer state. Even as a young girl, if I wanted her attention, I had to be interesting, engaging, and funny, because that carried weight. And eventually, after listening to comics talk about comedy for a very long time, I thought, hey, I can do this. And took some courses and got up on stage a couple times.
Wow. Do you have a favorite comedian?
That's a great question. I don't have a one that stands out. I kind of, I'm in the butcher shop seeing how things get made. So it's hard to appreciate the food that comes out of the butcher.
Or is there someone who inspires you in their methodology or something?
Good question. Terms? When I listen to comedy, I can taste it and say oh, they did that type of approach. Okay. Oh, it looks like, they took that topic and twisted it that way. And I can find all the elements. If I could think of one person who inspired me the most, I think I would say it was Pete Holmes. Okay. He had a talk show for a little bit. He has a long-standing podcast that I listened to hours of. He let me know that you can be very human on stage, and being human on stage is a good thing. You can present yourself as somebody that you're not, but if you come to it with your own voice and perspective, it'll read so much better to the audience and make your jokes funnier once they understand who you are, and they can tell who you are from what you write.
Yeah, and I guess I'm no expert on comedy, but from what I've seen even over on TV, it seems like it's evolved from this slapsticky, right? I mean, back in the day, right? Black and white, because you can't do very much. So it's kind of slapsticky. And today it's more it's funny, but really the best punchlines really make you think, and maybe are a commentary on society or a political topic or something like that. People like that. And I don't know if it's just our media has evolved, but I do think people like getting deeper than just being oh, haha, that guy fell on a banana.
In the Middle Ages, the only people that were allowed to tell the truth to the king and to the court was the jester. It was only the comedian who was allowed to speak and say what was really true. And just through the act of doing that, they were able to produce laughter, because everybody knows it, but no one's saying it. And that's where I see the parallel between science and comedy, is that they both tell the truth, and sometimes at the detriment of themselves. Scientists can get in trouble for telling the truth because it's not popular, and comedians can too. Both science and comedy get the world to face what is real. And I appreciate that in both of those art forms.
So I have a question about, in terms of stage fright. So I know some people actually hate being in front of other people performing, and they have to get over it. It sounds like maybe you were naturally a performer, but did you ever have to get over that? Do you ever feel scared when you have to go perform in front of people?
Oh, I'm terrified. Yeah. I don't get over it. No, there's not for me, at least. I'm always in the back. I'm trying to channel Eminem so that I'm pumping myself up mom spaghetti style, and trying to be brave and see myself on that stage. It's really helpful when you can't see the audience. When there's lights everywhere, you can just pretend that you're in your living room and doing things. But when I was presenting science, like when I was presenting my research, I was just always terrified, and I'd get like this tremor in my voice. And I actually had to pull from my stand-up experience and bring it more into my science presentation so that I could have the confidence that I needed to be able to present clearly and in a manner that would communicate what I wanted to say.
So now that you're done with your PhD, you are the smartest person in the room 99.9% of the time. So how does it feel?
It's depressing. I don't like it. I miss academia for the intelligent people. Definitely. I luckily have very smart friends, and
people think you're the smartest person in the room, but you just know, I just know a lot about one thing and pretty much nothing about anything else still. And
you are so wrong. Let me tell you right now, you are so wrong. I guarantee you, if you versus another person are presented with something where you have to problem solve, you have to get from point A to point B, that because you have pushed your mind to be able to understand very abstract or esoteric ideas and been able to generate ways to answer very difficult questions that nobody else has tried to do yet, like on the cutting edge, I guarantee you're going to get to point B faster than the other person. I've seen that a lot in my life. I noticed it a little bit at the end of grad school, but after I got my PhD, I realized just that mantra that they kept on telling us, that like, oh, these are, like problem solving skills that you're learning that you'll take into your life. And I was like, yeah. No, I can solve problems that other people can't. And that makes me sound really conceited. So I don't know if you want to include that, but I hung a set of curtains like a goddamn master. I was just like drilling with that drill. I was like, all right, here are the tools. Here's the problem. Here's how I'm going to present it. And I really impressed my mother. So there.
Yeah, no, I actually love putting together IKEA furniture. It's very, and I have this like engineering background too. So it's just soothing to like put things together. But I will say, getting to the first layer of that, of like, what are tools? Like, I feel like there's certain things that I just like missed because I was so zoned in on my education that there's just like life things that I'm relearning. But you're right. I think there is a general problem solving skill set. It is overgeneralized where people are like, oh, I can problem solve, but it's not, because you're always trying to like get yourself into a job by problem solving, but it is true.
It's so true. We're really good. We've got like very expensive brains.
That's right. Please pay me for my brain. Thank you.
Yes.
Now that you've made it out of your PhD, would you do it again?
Yes, because I had to for myself. And if you are on the edge and not knowing if you should, then you shouldn't. Jerry Seinfeld used to have an approach whenever somebody came to him and asked, oh, wow, I really like your comedy. I think I want to be a stand-up comic too. And Jerry Seinfeld would say, no, you can't do it. And basically that would end the conversation. And his idea behind that was it would scare off anybody who was just on the fence. But somebody who really did want to become a stand-up comic would ignore him and still do it anyways. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's what PhD programs need to present. It's going to be one of the hardest things that you ever do in your life. And if you have to do it for yourself, then you're going to find yourself in a PhD program or a master's program. But if you're just thinking about it as a way to kill the next 5 years of your life, it's not for you. And you might just flunk out anyways. So only the most dedicated, only the people who can't fail for themselves should attempt doing a graduate program.
The point of this content is not to convince people to do a PhD. It's to show the diversity of PhDs. And honestly, I think there's also a lot of financial considerations people need to think about as well. It's at least 5 years where you're not getting paid at all or not getting paid very much. And depends on what you want to do after that. It might not even be relevant.
True. Yeah. You do end up with a very expensive brain afterwards.
That's right. We have to figure out how to monetize our brains. I feel like maybe that is the problem now. So, PhDizzle.
Having fun with smart people who do cool things.